न्यूज नाइट was brought to you by बांगर सीमेंट, सस्ता नहीं सबसे अच्छा।
Hello and welcome to Wide Angle. The situation in Ukraine is explosive. And to discuss and shed light on this very, very complicated situation in Ukraine, we have a very distinguished panel here today. We have from the extreme right, Ambassador Alexander Kadakin of Russia, and then a former ambassador to Moscow for India, Prabhat Shukla, who is now a senior person at the Vivekanand International Foundation. When the title came up that is Ukraine exploding, Prabhat entered a caveat. He said, no, it is imploding. Why did you do that?
Okay, look, it's a technical point. Explosion means it has ripples outside. At the moment, what I'm seeing is a much more of a play within the country. And part of it, I think, because of the mishandling by the Kiev government, they have alienated very important segments of Ukrainian society. And I think the danger continues that if they mishandle, they continue to mishandle, then it could get even worse. It should be the effort of all of us, including India, by the way. I think perhaps because of our inter-domestic preoccupations right now, we are not giving it the attention that it deserves, either in the media, and thanks to you for having brought this up today, or certainly at the governmental level. I think it requires a little more serious attention, and it has implications for one of our most important bilateral relationships, which is with Russia. So for that reason, I preferred the other term, because at least as of now, I don't see, especially after yesterday's agreement in Geneva, I don't see that it's going to explode outside and have ripple effects north, south, east and west. That at the moment, I'm not able to see. But I do want to pursue this a little more, because I think what has not been, the case that has not been made adequately is the Russian stake in what is going on. And that actually relates to the centrality of the Black Sea in the Russian strategy in this region. I think that is not adequately understood and certainly not adequately projected, especially in the Western media. And you know, we saw this in the case of Georgia in 2008 for exactly similar reasons. They detached Abkhazia, which is something like
Ossetia
and well, I'm picking Abkhazia because Abkhazia is about 40% of the Black Sea coast of Georgia. It's the Black Sea that, to my mind, is very, very important. And the Crimea, of course, is the mistress of the Black Sea. The Russians have fought over it for centuries. It's where Yalta is. It's where a lot of their history has been shaped. And it's also their only round-the-year warm water base for the Navy, which gives them access to the Mediterranean Sea, through the Mediterranean Sea into the West Asian region today. And last but not least, they have a set of pipelines planned and existing under the waters of the Black Sea, all of which are absolutely vital Russian interests. And it was easy to predict that Russia was going to fight for them.
Right. Sasha, I have a feeling that you the Indian ambassador to Moscow, the former one, has actually said everything you wanted to say.
Absolutely, I agree with my dearest friend Prabhat 100% or more. The only thing I would like to add to what Ambassador Shukla said, you know, it is not strictly and not solely strategic interests in the Black Sea or in the Crimean Peninsula that were the guiding beacon for Russia to accept Crimea into its fold or to reunify with Crimea, so to say. But the most important factor was the vote at the referendum, which was held, and in which over 80% population participated, and more than 90% opted for the reunification with the Russian Federation. You may not know the whole history of Crimea, but I would like very briefly to say that Crimea had never been in the Ukraine. Never, ever. It was only by...
Part of the Russian narrative right from...
right from the very beginning. Russia in the 17th, 18th century fought 3 major wars with Turkey, with the Ottoman Empire, to get Crimea. There were also wars with the Crimean Khan for the peninsula. And it was only in 1783 that Crimea became part of the Russian Empire, which it remained until the October Revolution, and which it remained during the Soviet Union's time until 1954, when Prime Minister Khrushchev, out of his just whim and just fantasy, he gifted it to Ukraine without asking anybody else. That's why it was by accident that Crimea became part of Ukraine. And on the whole, as was mentioned, the southern and eastern parts of Ukraine were added to that country again by Lenin in 21, before the Soviet Union was formed in 1922, because it was decided that since the Ukrainians comprise the greatest nation within the Soviet Union, they should have more territory. And territory was added to Ukraine, first eastern, southern parts of Novorussia, which means New Russia, and 54 the Crimea came. And even the western parts of Ukraine were added practically after 1945. The western Ukraine had never been part of Ukraine as such, because they were either part of the Lithuanian kingdom or Austro-Hungarian kingdom or Polish kingdom, but never they were in the Russian Empire.
Actually, this is wonderful that you have given this backdrop, because you are experts and you know the situation like the back of your hand. But the audiences, the situation is so rapidly moving that we have to carry our viewers with us. And therefore, you've done just the right thing by giving the background. In fact, my own association or my memory of Ukraine goes back to Babi Yar by Yevtushenko's famous poem. In Babi Yar, there are no memorials, if you remember. Now, that part...
And you know the Babi Yar tragedy, that terrible Holocaust, it was performed by hired policemen from Western Ukraine, those who are now at the helm in Kiev.
Yes, yes.
They were helping the Germans to exterminate thousands of Jews, Russians, Ukrainians, and other people.
That is absolutely true. Has the West not remember
The
that?
West knows everything. They know everything, but they become deaf and dumb when it does not suit their interests. You can just put them truth into their face.
Sasha, what is
But they
their
don't
interest?
hear, they don't listen.
No, that is fine. But what is, they must have an interest. What is their interest?
I think their interest is only to flare up and to flare up turmoil which is in the Ukraine. Because how can you say that when they were capturing government buildings in Kiev, those bandits, it was fight for democracy. But when eastern Ukrainians in Kharkov, Donetsk, other places captured the city councils, then they are terrorists.
Could I
These
come in
are
on this one?
sheer,
I
sheer
just want to-
double or triple and treble standards these are.
Yes.
I just want to
Right.
come in on this
No,
one.
you are really angry, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'll try and provide the rationale for this anger, which I don't feel, but which I do understand. If you look at the map, and I see that you have one there, look at the Black Sea. To come back to my favorite argument, the southern coast is all Turkey, right? NATO member. Move westwards or northwards, Bulgaria, NATO member, EU member. Romania, NATO, EU. Ukraine, candidate for both NATO and EU.
Correct.
A little stretch of Russia from, I think, Kerch to about Sochi, a little stretch. And then Georgia, candidate for both EU and NATO. So if there are already three member states.
And the Baltics.
No, I'm talking only Black Sea right now. If the other two, that is Ukraine and Georgia, are able to fulfill their strategic goal with the backing of NATO and the EU, the net result will be that the Black Sea becomes an American lake. Russia is not going to let this happen without a fight. Now, you can say, well, it's going to then be a question of muscle power. Fair enough. Ultimately, I think, unfortunately, the world has not moved beyond the stage of the ultimate arbiter being force. But this is so vital for Russia that they are not going to let the Black Sea simply slip away from their grip. And that is why I mentioned earlier the removal of Abkhazia. That's a way of, the most important port which Georgia has is in Abkhazia. So they have ensured that in the worst case...
Help me and the viewers understand this one basic elementary question. What is the American interest, except to squeeze the Russians out of the big strategic asset, which is the Black Sea? Is that what it is? I mean, then it's war.
Look, it's being played a little differently than overt war. So are we heading towards war? Personally, I think not.
No, yeah.
And I think, frankly, nobody can afford it, let alone
it,
want it. No one can even afford it. So it's not that. It's that there are a number of issues that they are, from the American perspective, the game plan has always been related to, in this part of the world, number one, removing first the Soviet Union and then Russia as a potential security threat or a security challenger, even regionally now. And secondly, the big game is hydrocarbons. They have not even achieved the first objective yet, and that is why the thrust towards expansion of NATO, expansion of the EU. By the way, yesterday, day before, yesterday, the phone-in, yesterday, Putin's phone-in.
Phone-in was yesterday.
I think it was yesterday.
Yesterday for about 4 hours.
For the first time, he has linked it, in fact, to the expansion of NATO,
Yes,
what
yes.
they have done.
Yes.
And the point is that as far as the Americans and some of their allies in the EU are concerned, this expansion has to continue to keep the pressure up on Russia, number one.
Yes.
And the second one is on hydrocarbons. Not just the source, not just ownership of the source, but also the transportation of the hydrocarbons. That has become the truly
The transportation
driving
to Europe.
from the Caspian
Yes.
and
yes.
the Central Asian
Right,
sources.
right.
Which way will it go? Through what routes will it go?
Yes.
And from the American perspective, Russia has to be squeezed out of this.
Yeah.
Now, at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union, all the lines ran through Russia or Russian-controlled territory. And therefore, you had the first fight in Chechnya, because Grozny was a major center. And now the fight has widened to cover the Black Sea, to bring Turkey in, to bring Syria in. All of them are linked with this strategy.
What are the divisions? Now, there are two things. One is Europe has one set of a different approach from the United States. In fact, it would be a good idea to take up the narrative from one or the other of the two points of departure I have in mind. We could actually start from when the Russians, I mean Lavrov, actually got the Americans off the hook in Syria by bringing out getting the regime to surrender its chemical weapons, and that became the excuse for not rushing into war, which in retrospect now seems would have been a disaster. Now everything then Geneva II took place, and what started to go wrong, very briefly?
I think everything started when the so-called government in Kiev came to power. That was the beginning. And you know, one day on the 20th...
No, but why would they do that? The script was going like
but
this.
that is on the 21st February. The rebels, so-called rebels, signed an agreement with then very much in force Ukrainian President Yanukovych.
Yes.
On the 21st they do it in the presence of
You're
Poland, Germany, and
France.
France, yes.
Yes.
And they sign an agreement to finish, to quieten down the Maidan in Kiev. They have done it, but the next morning that agreement was just scrapped like toilet paper, thrown out, and not respected by those sides because...
Yes.
And they toppled the president immediately. What is then the cost? What is the worth of their signature?
What we have covered,
that is what gave signal to Crimea and to eastern and southern parts of Ukraine.
I am not yet understanding the why of it, and we shall get to that again after a short break.
किसान है भारत के मजबूत हाथ। किसानों को मिलता रहेगा फसल पर सुनिश्चित लाभ और जमीन की सही कीमत। कांग्रेस की टीम है आपके साथ। हर हाथ शक्ति, हर हाथ तरक्की।
बांगर सीमेंट, सस्ता नहीं, सबसे अच्छा।
महिलाएं हैं भारत के मजबूत हाथ। महिलाओं को मिलेगा जीविका के लिए 1 लाख रुपए तक का आसान लोन और उनकी सुरक्षा के लिए पुलिस फोर्स में होंगी 25% महिलाएं। कांग्रेस की टीम है आपके साथ। हर हाथ शक्ति, हर हाथ तरक्की।
मैं तो सारे मैसेज पढ़ूंगी। मैं नहीं देखी तुम्हारा मोबाइल।
तू कब आया मोनू?
अब तो मोनू के कॉलेज वापस जाने का टाइम आ गया है। जब भी कॉलेज जाने की बात करो, इसका चेहरा उतर जाता है। कुछ तो गड़बड़ है।
नहीं, नया स्टूडेंट है ना, तो सीनियर तो रैगिंग करते ही होंगे। चिंता वाली कोई बात नहीं।
चिंता की बात है भाई साहब। रैगिंग जैसे गंभीर मामले को नजरअंदाज मत कीजिए। एंटी रैगिंग हेल्पलाइन नंबर पे कॉल करें और उनसे सलाह और सहयोग लें।
एंटी रैगिंग हेल्पलाइन नंबर 1800-180-5522 पर कॉल करें।
जो मेरी काबिलियत और रोजगार की दूरी को कम करता है, मेरा वोट उसी को। मेरा वोट कांग्रेस को।
Welcome back to Wide Angle. Sasha, you were talking about the agreement which was signed and then it was repudiated. About that time, the American Deputy Secretary of State from the State Department, Victoria Nuland, turned up. And she used a certain unmentionable term. If I use that word on this program, I'm sure it will be censored. She used a 4-letter word for the European Union. What was the tension between the Americans and the Europeans at that stage?
I think we have to ask Victoria Nuland. She was, you know, I don't know, she was distributing croissants in Maidan, just keeping a big heap of croissants in her, well, somewhere in a bag and just giving it to the people, you know, but...
I'll give you a speculative answer. And I'm using the word speculative only because it's better to use it. The conversation that you're referring to dates to the 12th of February.
Correct.
Okay? And she was speaking to the US ambassador in Kiev. And there, you know, apart from the colorful language, which is very telling, I'm glad you were focused on it. The other thing was that she discusses certain personnel issues, right? And she says that Klitschko is not the right person.
The boxer,
and she
the
says
boxer.
the heavyweight boxing champion. And she says Yatsenyuk is the right man. Now, this is of course before the agreement was signed. Now, as soon as the agreement was signed, now here is one more leak which is worth blending into the narrative, which was that the Estonian foreign minister, speaking to Catherine Ashton, tells her that the firing that broke out on the Maidan was actually done by the protesters. Now, this
and
is
the
something
sharpshooters
which
also.
has been kept away from the public gaze. What happened was that because of that shooting, 80 people died, which in Ukraine, which in any country is a large number, but especially in the context of Ukraine, it was a very large number. And then the message was out that time's up for Yanukovych. Now, the Europeans were pushing for a gradual agreement so that Yanukovych would stay, certain constitutional changes would first follow, and then a pre-term presidential election would take place.
And the date was fixed.
No later than December 2014. This is what was overturned by the shooting. And not by coincidence, Klitschko is out but backing from the outside, and Yatsenyuk is the prime minister, and in the role that that conversation had in mind for him. So this was the root of the differences between the United States and the EU.
Now, when differences erupt like this, Prabha, you know that they are deep. I mean, there are contradictions between Germany and the United States, and you, from your vantage point in Moscow, just reflect. I mean, they are there.
Yes.
Will you dilate on that? Because Sasha wants to steer clear. He just wants to go for the Americans and not the Europeans at this point.
Okay, look, I think the starting point would have to be, firstly, unraveling, if you like, the different strands within the EU itself. If you won't take my word for it, take Rumsfeld's word for it. There's an old Europe and there's a new Europe. I think the new Europe is much more anti-Russian. It was steeped in anti-Sovietism. In fact, its birth took place in an anti-Soviet context, and that has been transferred into anti-Russianism. Old Europe understands, because they have lived through a very different kind of historical experience. It was Alexander I who said, we have now shown that you can't get from Paris to Moscow, but you can get from Moscow to Paris. And he said this in Paris. So, you know, they understand that there is a point
and it
beyond...
happened exactly.
And that's exactly what happened.
200 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And then it happened again a little shorter while back, only it wasn't Paris but Berlin. So, you know, Paris and Berlin have an understanding of just how far you can try to isolate and bottle up and push Russia. Elsewhere, there is a different kind of strategy, number one. Now, the big question, really, you know, when the Georgian war happened, Sarkozy was the president of France. And Sarkozy had good relations with all sides. And so he was able to play a mediatory role. Unfortunately, Hollande doesn't have that same kind of equation with the Russian leadership. I think Merkel could build that kind of relationship, but the Germans still have that baggage of the past. If they were to strike out on their own today, I have a feeling that at least in some sections of the European Union, there would be awkward questions about just what is going on. And you know what, the word that's always thrown at Germany is Sonderweg. Are they branching out on their own?
Always.
And I think this is something which they don't want to face and will not face. So I guess this is going to fester for a while. I just want to add one more thing. which is that, you know...
Sasha is raising his hand there.
No, no.
All right, I yield to... I yield.
No, I would like to
We'll come
return...
back to
We'll come back to this, yeah.
I want to return to the Europeans, as you say. After the Caribbean referendum and its reunification with Mother Russia, you know, we are still... I cannot answer this question for myself. How come when after the fall of the Berlin Wall,
Yes.
Germany was reunified, it was quite all right, it was wonderful.
Yes.
And to get that reunification, they were promising us honey and, you know, everything. And we shall not move to the borders of the Soviet Union. They were ready, even as Chancellor told Gorbachev in the Caucasus, that they were even almost ready for the neutral status of Germany. And I can't understand. On the one hand, reunified Germany is very fine. But reunified Crimea, reunified with Russia, it is very bad. Though not a single person died. Unlike now, that the Kiev authorities have brought arms and tanks and planes against the Russian population of eastern and southern regions.
Ambassador, they accuse you of wanting to upturn the new Kiev, new Ukraine. You want to disrupt what they call new Ukraine. New Ukraine, Prabhat. What is that? You were talking about New Europe.
Well, I should mention this on a personal note. Mine is the first official footprint on Ukrainian soil, on the soil of independent Ukraine. I opened the embassy there.
I'll tell you something. I'll just this is
No,
so
please,
interesting.
please,
I'll
sure.
take a small break.
Sure.
A very small break, and we will revert.
युवा है भारत के मजबूत हाथ। हर साल 2 करोड़ युवाओं को मिलेगी ट्रेनिंग और रोजगार के अवसर और हर जरूरतमंद युवा को स्कॉलरशिप। कांग्रेस की टीम है आपके साथ। हर हाथ शक्ति, हर हाथ तरक्की।
बांगड़ सीमेंट, सस्ता नहीं, सबसे अच्छा।
मजदूर है भारत के मजबूत हाथ। मजदूर भाई बहनों को मिलेगी मुफ्त दवाइयां और इलाज की सुरक्षा, साथ में पेंशन की गारंटी भी। कांग्रेस की टीम है आपके साथ। हर हाथ शक्ति, हर हाथ तरक्की।
कुछ परेशान हो दोस्त? प्रॉब्लम पानी को लेकर है। ग्राउंड वाटर लेवल नीचे जाने से पानी नहीं मिल पा रहा। ओह, मेरी सलाह मानो तो जल प्रबंधन के 3 मंत्र अपनाओ। 3 मंत्र? हाँ, पहला मंत्र है रिड्यूस, यानी फैक्ट्री में ऐसी तकनीक जिसमें पानी कम खर्च हो। दूसरा मंत्र है रीयूज, यानी प्रदूषित जल का ट्रीटमेंट करके दोबारा इस्तेमाल में लाओ। और तीसरा मंत्र है सेफ डिस्पोजल, प्रदूषित जल को ट्रीट करके ही बाहर छोड़ो ताकि पर्यावरण भी सुरक्षित रहे।
जल बचाएं, कल बचाएं।
साडा वोट तो उसी को जाएगा जिसने आज तक कभी किसी किसान के साथ नाइंसाफी नहीं होने दी। मेरा वोट कांग्रेस को।
Welcome back to Wide Angle. The time is running out. This is always a problem on programs like this, just when you warm up. Today, the war between the East and the West is not ideological, which the Cold War was. But there is a situation which is hotting up. Very briefly, do you think there is an occasion to at least contemplate some kind of a derivative of a smart non-alignment, some kind of an equidistant group? Sasha, what do you say?
Well, I think the voting in the United Nations General Assembly has shown and has reminded me of the golden days of non-alignment, because half the members of the General Assembly abstained or didn't vote. It means that there is a growing movement which is gaining force of those countries who do not want to have unipolar world order. And we also highly value, of course, India's position as regards the Crimean events and the events in the Ukraine. And it was specially mentioned and underlined by President Putin. He singled out India and China and thanked for the very well-balanced, wise, and objective approach to the
UN, both India and
to
China.
to the events.
Prabhat, on this non-aligned idea, some kind of a smart non-alignment, that is the term being used.
Yeah. Well, I heard you use the word derivative, and that frightened me a bit because derivatives have played merry hell into the world economy, so we don't want any derivatives around. But look, I don't know if you want non-aligned in that sense, because I mean it has a certain historical resonance. But yes, certainly, I believe that India particularly, and I hope this happens once we get a new government, has nothing at all to gain and everything to lose in growing tensions between Russia and America.
Yes.
And I think the big danger is that the more the West squeezes Russia, the more Russia is forced to lean on China, which they are not themselves comfortable doing, and which is certainly not in our interest. So I think that is where I would...
We will lean on our brother and sister India.
Well,
that's
on that,
where we shall lean.
That was very well said, Prabhat. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kadakin. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shukla. Thank you very much indeed. And we shall revert another day with a different program. Let us see where the situation in Ukraine takes us. It is at this particular juncture, the situation as I see it as follows. The West does not want a resurgent Russia. Russia does not want to be circumscribed. How do we get from here? On another program sometime. Good night and goodbye.